The struggle at the market. The alien city was alive with strange lights and tall buildings. The marketplace stretched wide under a sky glowing with twin suns. Shops and stalls lined both sides of the street, filled with bright fruits, steaming. Bread and shimmering alien foods, creatures of many shapes moved between the stalls, their voices mixing into a constant hum. But in the middle of all that noise, one figure walked slowly, her shoulders bent under the weight of worry. She was a mother, her skin pale and thin like she had not eaten well in many days. Her child clung to her side, small hands gripping her tattered clothes. The child's eyes were large, hungry, and filled with confusion. The mother tried to smile, but her lips trembled each time she looked at the price tags. The world around her felt heavy, like every step pressed her deeper into despair. She entered a food stall, the smell of warm bread and dried meat pulling her closer. The stall-keeper barely looked. At her, his eyes quickly scanned her worn clothes and tired face. Already he judged her. Already he knew she could not pay much. The mother picked up a loaf of bread, then a small packet of fruit. She glanced at her child, who nodded eagerly. His tiny stomach growled so loudly that the alien beside them laughed. The sound burned her heart, but she kept moving. At the counter, she placed the items one by one. The stall-keeper scanned them, his hands moving without emotion. When the total appeared on the glowing panel, her face fell. She reached into her bag and pulled out her credit chip. The screen blinked red. Not enough. Her heart sank. She tried again, swiping the chip twice, thrice, but the result did not change. Her child tugged at her sleeve, whispering softly, "Mama, please." The stall-keeper sighed loudly, his voice sharp. "Do you want them or not? Others are waiting." Behind her, a line of impatient customers muttered. Some crossed their arms, some clicked their tongues in annoyance. The mother felt heat rise in her cheeks. She lowered her head and whispered, I cannot pay." Shame cut through her like a blade. With trembling hands, she pushed the fruit packet back toward the stall-keeper. He snatched it quickly, almost smiling at her weakness. She tried to return the bread, too, but her child's grip tightened. The boy held the bread close, his small hand shaking as if someone would steal it from him. Tears filled his eyes. His mother looked down, her own heart breaking. For a long moment she froze, trapped between hunger and humiliation. Her chest hurt, her throat tightened, her eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to fight, to beg. But the cold faces around her killed every word. Every alien eye was on her, watching her fall lower and lower. The stall-keeper leaned forward, smirking. "Then leave if you cannot pay." The mother's knees almost gave out. She reached for the bread in her child's hands, slowly trying to take it back. The boy shook his head, whispering, "Please, Mama, no." Her heart shattered into pieces. She wanted to hold him, to promise him food, but she had no power. Her shaking hand reached again, pulling the bread from his grip. His tears spilled as he let go. The sound of his quiet sobs pierced the crowd. The marketplace fell strangely silent. The child's crying echoed, louder than the noise of the vendors, louder than the buzz of machines. Even those who mocked her earlier now shifted uncomfortably, but none of them moved, none of them spoke. They watched like it was entertainment, like her pain was part of the day's business. At that moment, a figure from behind the counter stepped forward. His uniform was plain, his badge small. He was not rich, not powerful. He was just a cashier, a human among aliens. For a second, his eyes met the mother's, and something stirred inside him. He saw the tears on her face, the weakness in her shoulders, and the desperation in her child's eyes. And in that instant, he made a choice. The mother tried to return the bread, her hand shaking as she pushed it across the counter. But the cashier placed his hand gently on hers, stopping her. His voice was calm but firm. "No. Keep it." The stallkeeper frowned. "She cannot pay." The cashier's eyes did not move away from the mother. "Then I will." The crowd gasped softly. Whispers spread instantly. "A human paying for her?" Some sneered, others raised their brows. A ripple of shock moved through the stall. The mother blinked in disbelief, her lips parting but no words coming out. The child wiped his tears, staring at the cashier as if he had seen a hero from the old stories. The cashier reached into his pocket and pulled out his own credit chip. He pressed it firmly against the scanner. The screen blinked green. Payment accepted. The stallkeeper shook his head, annoyed, but said nothing. The mother stood frozen, unable to move, unable to believe what just happened. Her heart pounded. In her chest, her breath shallow. The cashier pushed the bread and fruit back toward her, his eyes steady, his tone gentle. "Take them." For the first time in many days, the mother felt warmth in her chest. Her hands trembled as she accepted. "The food," she whispered, "thank you," her voice breaking into pieces. Her child clutched the bread tight, no longer crying, his eyes wide with hope. But in the shadows of the marketplace, not everyone was pleased. Unseen eyes watched the scene, recording every detail. To some, it was not an act of kindness. It was defiance, and in that crowded marketplace under the twin suns, a storm had begun, the refusal at the counter. The silence after the payment was heavy, like the marketplace itself held its breath. The mother stood frozen, her hands gripping the small bag of food as if it were the most precious treasure in the galaxy. Her child pressed against her side, eyes still wide with disbelief. Around them, whispers spread like smoke, curling into every corner of the crowded stall. Aliens shook their heads. Some sneered openly. Others whispered to one another. Their voices carried the same tone of contempt, not for the mother, but for the human cashier who dared to step out of line. The stallkeeper leaned back, folding his arms with a smirk. His voice was sharp and mocking. "You think you are some kind of hero, human? She could not pay. She should have left hungry. That is the way of the world." The words stung the air, cold and cruel. The mother lowered her head, clutching the food tighter, shame still burning her cheeks. She wanted to thank the cashier again, but her lips would not move. Fear and humiliation wrapped around her like chains. The cashier did not flinch. His eyes stayed on the mother, not on the sneering vendor. His voice was steady. No one should watch their child cry for food. The words were simple, but they carried weight, like heavy stones thrown into a silent lake. The crowd shifted uneasily, because they knew it was true, even if they would never admit it. A child's hunger was not a crime, but in this city of cold rules, kindness itself had become forbidden. The stallkeeper slammed his hand against the counter, his voice loud now. "You insult our way of life with your weakness. Do you think the strong will respect this? Do you think mercy makes you powerful? It makes you pathetic." The customers behind the mother began to laugh. A cruel, sharp laughter that cut through the air like blades. The sound made the child flinch, his small hands gripping the bread tighter as if it might be taken away again. The mother's eyes filled with tears, but she dared not speak. The cashier stood straighter, his face calm though his heart raced. He was aware that every eye was on him now. Aliens towered over him, their glowing eyes filled with contempt. He was just a human worker in their city, someone they normally ignored. But now he had stepped out of his invisible place and they hated him for it. Yet he did not back down. He placed his hand on the counter and leaned forward slightly. His words low but firm. "I refuse to let her leave empty-handed." The words struck like lightning. A hush fell again. The crowd stared, shocked that a human would not only act but speak so boldly. A few aliens muttered under their breath, "How dare he speak like this? He will bring trouble upon himself." He should know his place. The stallkeeper's smirk disappeared. Replaced by a look of cold anger, he wanted to humiliate the human, to crush his defiance in front of everyone. But for now, he could only sneer, his pride unwilling to pay the price of a bigger scene. The mother's hands shook as she tried to step away, her instincts screaming at her to leave before things grew worse. She clutched her child close, whispering softly, "We must go." But her son shook his head, his eyes still on the cashier. To the boy, this man was no ordinary worker. He had become something more in that moment, a shield, a figure who had stood against the tide of cruelty. The child's small voice broke through the tension. "Thank you, sir." His words were pure and innocent, but they carried farther than anyone. He expected. The crowd shifted again, uneasy, because the voice of a child made the cruelty of their silence heavier than stone. The cashier gave the boy a faint smile, though his chest tightened. He knew what he had done would not be forgotten, not by the crowd, and not by those who enforced the alien order of this city. Already he could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him, the kind of gaze that marked trouble. But even with that knowledge he did not regret it. His heart beat with quiet resolve, stronger than his fear. The stallkeeper growled, waving his hand dismissively, "Take your food and leave. You are wasting everyone's time." The mother bowed her head quickly, pulling her child toward the exit. But before stepping away, she turned once more to the cashier. Her lips trembled, and though her voice was weak, her words carried all the gratitude of her soul. "I will not forget this," she whispered. Her eyes glistened, reflecting both shame and hope. The cashier only nodded, his face calm, but inside he felt something stir, something that whispered this was not the end. As the mother disappeared into the sea of bodies, the crowd began to move again, but the whispers did not die. They followed the cashier like shadows. He returned to his place behind the counter, but nothing felt the same anymore. His co-workers stared at him, some with disgust, others with fear. A fellow alien cashier leaned closer and hissed, "You should not have done that. They were watching. Do you want to bring ruin to yourself?" The human cashier said nothing, only continued with his work, but his silence was louder than words. Far away, hidden in the corners of the market, enforcers watched through recording devices. Their eyes narrowed as they replayed the scene. To them, the act was not mercy. It was rebellion. If one human could dare to break the order, others might find courage too, and that they could not allow. A message was sent quietly to higher command. A human cashier had acted against the rules. He had to be dealt with, but the human did not know this yet. He only felt the strange stillness in his chest, the strange fire that came from doing what was right, even when the world called it wrong. The mother's tearful eyes haunted him. The boy's small voice echoed in his mind. He knew trouble was coming. He could almost feel the storm forming in the distance. Yet he stood firm, because some storms were worth facing, and in that moment the marketplace returned to its usual noise. But beneath the sound of selling and shouting, something unseen had shifted. A seed had been planted, born from defiance, watered by kindness. A seed that no sneer, no law, no enforcer could erase. And while the city walked on as if nothing had happened, in truth, nothing would ever be the same again. Whispers of defiance. The marketplace carried on with its usual rhythm, the vendors shouting, the machines humming, the smell of cooked meals drifting into the air, but beneath the surface of ordinary noise, something unusual had begun to grow. It was quiet at first, like the faint ripple across calm water. Yet every alien who had witnessed the human cashier's refusal to humiliate the struggling mother felt the weight of that moment pressing on their thoughts. They pretended to forget. They pretended to laugh and sneer as they always did, but the image of a human paying for someone else lingered like a stubborn shadow. The mother, clutching the small bag of food, walked quickly through the crowded streets, her child close by her side. her heart beating fast as if the ground itself would swallow her if she slowed. Every corner of her mind told her to hide, to vanish, because kindness this bold never went unnoticed in a city where mercy was weakness. Her child, however, kept looking behind them, his small eyes shining with something she had not seen in him for many months. "Hope," he whispered softly. "Mama, he was brave, wasn't he?" And she nodded without answering, for her throat had closed with emotion she dared not release in public. Back at the stall, the cashier returned to his duties, his hands moving across scanners and chips like before, but every gesture felt heavier, every glance sharper. His co-workers avoided speaking to him, their silence mixed with unease and quiet judgment. One muttered under his breath that humans did not belong in such places. Another shook her head as if he had invited disaster upon them all, but none dared confront him directly, for the fire in his eyes was strange, not loud, not violent, but a calm force that unsettled those around him. The customers that passed through his counter that afternoon looked at him differently too. Some sneered and whispered insults to each other about his foolishness. Others avoided his eyes altogether. One alien woman with long silver skin glared at him as she placed her goods on the counter, her voice sharp and mocking. "Do you plan to pay for me too, human?" she hissed. The crowd laughed, but the cashier did not answer. He scanned her items silently, handed them back, and moved on, his quiet refusal to respond making the laughter sound emptier than before. Far above the marketplace in one of the tall black towers, the enforcers reviewed the recordings again and again, their glowing screens showing the human's face, his steady words, his choice to act against the cold law of strength. One officer leaned forward and muttered. He defied the order. He must be watched. If one human can do this, others may follow. Another nodded grimly. Compassion spreads faster than fire. If it is not crushed now, it could unravel everything. They sent reports to higher authorities, marking the human cashier as a threat, though he had no army, no weapon, only the courage to say no when the world demanded silence. The whispers spread quickly through the marketplace and into the streets beyond. Vendors spoke of it behind their stalls. Guards heard about it during their patrols. Even children whispered the story to each other in alleys. It grew with every telling. Some called the human foolish, some called him weak, but others felt something stir inside them, though they would never admit it out loud. A question whispered in their hearts. Why would a human, of all people, show such strength of heart when the rest of them obeyed cruelty without question? The mother, safe inside her small shelter on the edge of the city, fed her child with the bread and fruit, each bite giving him new life. Tears rolled down her face as she watched him eat, her chest filled with guilt and gratitude all at once. She thought of the human cashier's face, the calm way he stood when everyone mocked him. She thought of the kindness in his eyes, and in that moment she promised herself she would not forget. Even if the world punished him, she would carry his memory in her heart. Back in the market, as the day stretched toward evening, more customers approached the human's counter, and each of them carried the weight of rumor. One alien merchant leaned in close after paying and whispered so quietly that no one else could hear. "Be careful, they are watching you." The cashier's hand paused for only a second before he continued his work, his face calm, but inside he felt the truth of those words like a cold blade across his back. He had felt the eyes on him since the moment he acted, unseen but heavy, like a storm building at the edge of the sky. When the shift ended, he walked home through the narrow streets of the alien city, the lights glowing cold and bright above him. He passed groups of aliens who pointed at him and muttered. He heard their voices in the dark, some filled with hatred, others filled with curiosity. That is him, the human who paid. Why would he waste his credits on someone else? It is dangerous. He will regret it. The whispers followed him like shadows, but beneath the mockery there was also fear, because deep inside they all knew what he had done was more powerful than their laws. That night, as he sat alone in his small dwelling, The weight of the day pressed upon him. He knew trouble was coming. He knew the enforcers would not let this pass. Yet he also felt something else burning quietly in his chest, a strength he had not known before. The simple act of refusing to return that bread had lit a flame. And no matter how much fear whispered in his mind, he could not regret it. The face of the mother and the voice of the child echoed in him, and those echoes were stronger than any threat. But even as he sat in silence, far away in the enforcer's tower, orders were being prepared. The human cashier had become a symbol, and symbols could not be allowed to spread. The city might have appeared calm, but beneath the surface, whispers of defiance were already alive, and soon those whispers would grow louder until they could no longer be ignored. The watchers in the shadows, the city never truly slept. Even when the twin suns dipped low and the night lamps filled the streets with pale blue light, the alien capital remained alive with movement. Traders closed their stalls but carried boxes. Through side alleys, guards patrolled in heavy boots, and machines whirred endlessly. Yet hidden beneath this restless life there existed another rhythm, one colder and quieter, the rhythm of those who watched, their presence unseen but constant. In the tallest black tower of the market district, enforcers sat before glowing screens, each one filled with the faces of citizens recorded by hidden lenses. One image in particular replayed again and again, the human cashier, his hand stopping the mother, his words spoken in calm defiance. "Then I will." The moment looped over and over, and every time it played the room filled with unease. To the enforcers this was not a story of kindness. It was the first spark of rebellion, and sparks, if not crushed, became fire. One officer leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as the human's face froze on the screen. He is no leader, no fighter, yet look at him. He has already unsettled the order of things. His colleague responded with a growl. That is why humans are dangerous. They carry weakness and call it strength. They spread hope where there should be obedience. If this act is not silenced, it will grow. They marked his name in their records, labeling him a person of interest, a threat to the stability of the city, though all he had done was refuse to let a hungry child go without food. Meanwhile, the human walked home through dim streets, unaware of the depth of the eyes upon him. Though his heart carried a strange heaviness, he felt the looks of those he passed, he heard whispers in corners, and he sensed that the simple act in the marketplace had shifted something in the air. In his small dwelling he tried to rest, but every creak of the building, every shadow on the wall reminded him that he had been seen, not just by a mother and child, not just by a mocking crowd, but by powers that thrived in silence and control. The mother sat in her shelter on the far side of the city, feeding her child. The last of the bread the human had bought. The boy's strength returned slowly, his face brighter, his voice stronger. She held him close and whispered prayers of thanks. Yet her heart trembled with fear, for she knew what kindness in such a world could cost. She had seen others punished for less. Acts of mercy turned into crimes. And though she wanted to go back and thank the cashier again, she also knew that stepping near him might bring danger upon them both. Still, in the quiet of the night, she swore she would never forget the man who had given her hope when the world gave her only shame. Back in the towers, the enforcers debated his fate. Some called for immediate arrest. Others suggested watching longer to see if more humans would be emboldened by his defiance. One officer, older and colder than the rest, spoke with finality. "Symbols are more dangerous than soldiers. This man has become a symbol. His kindness will be told in whispers, and whispers weaken control. If we do not strike soon, it will be too late." His words were met with silence and then agreement. Plans began forming in the shadows. The next morning, the human returned to the marketplace. The same path he walked each day, but the air felt different. He noticed the way aliens stepped aside not out of respect but out of unease. He noticed how their eyes lingered, some filled with anger, some with quiet curiosity. A group of vendors whispered as he passed. One muttered, "That is him, the human who dared." Another replied, "He will not last long. They will make sure of it." The cashier kept walking, his jaw tight, his steps steady, though every instinct told him that unseen watchers followed close. Inside the stall, he began his work again, scanning items, handing goods, exchanging credits. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Each transaction was carried out under the heavy weight of expectation. He could feel his co-workers stealing glances. He could sense that whispers had grown even among them. One dared to approach, an alien with gray skin and tired eyes, who leaned close and whispered just above a breath, "They are watching you. Be careful. You may think this ends with bread, but it never ends so simple here." Before he could respond, the alien walked away quickly, leaving him with more questions than answers. As the day went on, customers came and went, some with mocking laughter, others with forced silence. But a strange thing began to happen, too. A few offered him quiet, nods, subtle acknowledgments of respect. They would never dare say it loud, yet their eyes carried something different. A recognition that the human had done what none of them dared, the cashier noticed. But he kept his face calm, his heart steady, though inside he wondered how long before the shadows reached for him. By the time night returned, the enforcers had gathered more footage, more whispers, more evidence of his defiance. They reviewed every angle of the marketplace, every word spoken, every reaction in the crowd. They were not only watching him, they were watching those who looked at him differently, those who seemed to be moved by his act, and that worried them more than the human himself. Because rebellion did not begin with weapons. It began with hearts, and hearts were beginning to stir. In his dwelling, the human sat by the small window. Looking out at the towers that glowed in the distance, he felt the weight of silence pressing against him. And though fear brushed against his mind, there was something stronger rising within him, a sense that what he had done was not only right, but necessary. He thought of the mother's trembling smile, the child's innocent voice, and he knew that even if the shadows closed in, he would not take back his choice. He would not let the memory of that moment be stolen, and far above him, in the black towers where the watchers lived, orders were being sealed. Silent as smoke, swift as blades, the human cashier had been marked. The city might not yet know it, but in the quiet places of power a decision had been made. His kindness had become a crime, and soon the shadows would move from watching to striking. The clash of kindness and power. The marketplace bustled as always under the glow of the suns. But for those who lived there every day, the air felt different. It carried an unspoken tension, a weight that pressed on every conversation and lingered in every corner. The human cashier stood at his counter as usual, his hands steady, his face calm, yet deep inside his chest the pounding of his heart reminded him that this was no ordinary day. He felt the whispers following him. He sensed the eyes watching from shadows, and though he did not know when, he knew something was coming. It began with silence, a silence so sharp it cut through the normal clamor of the market. The vendors' shouts fell quieter, the hum of chatter dulled, and footsteps grew slower. The human lifted his eyes and saw them, alien guards pushing their way through the crowd, their armor dark and shining, their boots heavy against the stone ground. The crowd shifted quickly, parting to make way, their murmurs rising in waves. "The enforcers, they have come," some whispered in fear, others in cruel delight, already sensing the spectacle about to unfold. The guards stopped in front of the cashier's stall, their leader stepping forward, a tall figure with a face hidden behind a mask of silver, his voice cold and echoing. "Human, you will answer for your actions." The marketplace fell into silence again, all eyes fixed on the moment. The mother who had been saved was not there, yet the memory of her shameful struggle hung in every mind. The cashier stood tall, his jaw tight, his body tense but his voice steady as he replied, "What actions?" The guard's tone sharpened. "You defied the order of strength. You shamed our law by paying for another. You dared to act above your station. Kindness is weakness. Weakness invites collapse. We cannot allow it." The words rolled through the marketplace like thunder. The crowd shivered, some nodding in agreement, others lowering their eyes in shame. Yet the cashier did not lower his gaze. His eyes remained locked on the armored figure before him, and his answer came firm. "I only refuse to let a child starve." The words spread like fire, striking hearts in the crowd. For all their rules, for all their cold laws, deep inside they knew hunger was not a crime. Still the enforcer laughed bitterly. "You think your words make you strong? You are nothing but a human, a servant in our city. You do not decide what is right. You obey." The guard leaned closer, his silver mask reflecting the human's calm face. "Now, you will apologize, return what is not yours, and beg for forgiveness, or face the punishment." The cashier's chest rose and fell, his mind heavy with fear, but his spirit unbroken. He looked beyond the guard, at the crowd watching in silence, at the faces filled with curiosity, mockery, and even something deeper. He knew his choice was not only for himself, but for every eye watching, so he spoke without trembling. "I will not apologize. I will not say mercy is wrong. If it is weakness to help a mother and child, then I choose that weakness." The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. The crowd gasped, their voices rising into murmurs. He defied them. A human spoke against the enforcers. He is mad. The guards shifted uneasily, for they had expected fear, surrender, perhaps even begging. But not this. Not a human standing tall in defiance. The leader's voice roared now, louder than the noise of the market. "Then you have chosen punishment." He raised his hand, and 2 guards stepped forward, their weapons crackling with energy, ready to seize him. But something unexpected stirred in the crowd. It was faint at first, a murmur that grew into a voice. "He only helped a child," someone said. Another added, "Is that a crime?" The whispers multiplied, passing from alien to alien until they became a low rumble across the marketplace. The guards glanced nervously at the shifting crowd. They had come to make an example of the human. Yet the crowd's reaction was different. Not mocking, not jeering, but questioning. The enforcer slammed his weapon against the counter, sending sparks across its surface. "Silence!" he roared. "This city does not question the law. This city obeys." The crowd fell quiet again, but the silence was no longer the same. Beneath it there was a pulse, a rhythm of defiance, like a hidden heartbeat refusing to stop. The cashier stood taller, his voice calm though his body shook inside. "Then punish me. But know this, you can break my body, but you will not erase what I did. They all saw it. They all know it happened. A child was hungry, and I gave him food. You cannot change that truth." The words pierced through the silence like a blade of light. The enforcer froze for a moment, because he understood the danger in those words. Truth, once spoken, could not be erased. The people had seen, they had heard, and now they would remember. Whether they admitted it or not, the act of kindness had become more than a moment. It had become a story, and stories carried power. The guards seized him, their grips harsh, dragging him forward, yet the human did not struggle. His face calm, his eyes unbroken. The crowd watched in silence, their hearts torn between fear and admiration. Some lowered their heads quickly, pretending not to care. Others held his gaze for just a second longer, their expressions unreadable. Yet something passed between them, something the enforcers could not stop. As he was dragged away, whispers followed. He was only a cashier. He stood against them. He helped when no one else would. The guards heard the whispers and cursed under their breath because they knew no matter how harsh the punishment, the story had already escaped their control. It had spread like smoke through the city, and smoke was impossible to hold. That night, As the enforcers carried their prisoner into the Tower of Judgment, the city did not sleep as usual. Behind closed doors, families whispered his name. In hidden alleys, traders repeated the tale, and in the small shelter at the edge of the city, a mother held her child close and prayed for the human who had given them food. Her tears fell not only from fear, but from hope, because she felt deep inside that his struggle was only beginning, and that his defiance might change more than just her life. It might change the city itself. The child's return. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The human cashier was gone from his stall, the marketplace returned to its noisy rhythm, but for those who had seen what happened, nothing truly felt the same. The guards had dragged him into the Black Tower, and no one expected to see him again. Yet the whispers did not stop. If anything, they grew louder, whispered in alleys, carried in homes, and murmured among traders who dared not speak too openly. The story of a human who had chosen kindness over fear became something greater than the act itself. It became a question that refused to die. The mother who had received his help lived with that question burning inside her. Each night she sat in her small shelter, the child curled in her arms, and she thought of the man who had stood tall before the enforcers. She remembered his calm voice saying he would not apologize, and his eyes that never lowered even when weapons were raised against him. Her son spoke of him often, his young voice filled with wonder. "Mama, he was brave, he was strong, not like them, but strong in his heart." And she would nod, unable to hide the tears in her eyes. Her child had grown stronger since that day. The food given by the human had saved him from sickness. His small frame now held more life, and his laughter returned. One morning he held up a small pendant they had kept hidden in their belongings. It was a simple stone wrapped in silver thread, a symbol of life, debt from their people, and he pressed it into her hand, saying, "Mama, we must give this to him. He saved us." She hesitated, for she knew approaching him now could bring danger. Yet her heart told her it was right. Kindness must be answered with gratitude, even if the world called it weakness. So she prepared herself, carrying her child into the city once more. Her steps were slow, her eyes alert, because she knew the streets were not safe. The enforcers patrolled more heavily than before, their presence a reminder that the city had no room for rebellion. But still she walked, guided by the memory of that man's courage. In her hands she clutched the pendant, tightly, hoping she would find him alive, hoping he would still be there. In the tower, the human was not treated kindly. They questioned him again and again, demanding he admit his guilt, demanding he call his act a mistake. But every time he answered, with the same calm voice, "I fed a child, I will not call that wrong." His refusal frustrated them. Some enforcers struck him, others locked him in silence for long hours, yet none of it broke him. His body bruised, his spirit remained unshaken, and in their frustration they made a mistake. They underestimated the power of patience. One evening, after days of isolation, they released him back into the city, not because they forgave him, but because they wanted the crowd to see his broken state. They expected him to crawl back to his stall weak and humiliated, a lesson for others. But when he walked out, though his steps were slow and his body carried marks of pain, his eyes still burned with the same steady fire, and that fire was noticed. The mother and child saw him as he returned, and their hearts leapt. For though he was weakened, he was not defeated. They followed him quietly, waiting until he reached a quiet street where no guards lingered. Then they stepped forward, the child clutching the bread-shaped toy he carried, his voice breaking with emotion as he called out, "Sir!" The human turned, surprised, and his weary eyes softened when he saw the familiar faces. The mother stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You saved us, and because of you, my child lives. I have nothing to give, but I offer this." She placed the small pendant into his hand, the stone glowing faintly in the night light. This is a symbol of life debt among our people. It means that as long as we live, we remember what you did, and we will carry it forever. The human looked down at the pendant, his fingers trembling as he closed around it, for though it was small, he felt the weight of it was greater than any chain. The child looked up at him with wide eyes. "They call you weak, but you are not weak. You are strong, stronger than them." His words pierced the silence, and the human felt warmth spread through his chest, for all the bruises, for all the threats. This small voice reminded him why he had chosen to stand. He knelt down, placing his hand gently on the boy's shoulder, and said softly, "Never forget. Kindness is strength." Their meeting did not go unnoticed. In the shadows across the street, figures moved, unseen but watching. The enforcers had not stopped following him, and now they saw the connection between the human and the mother. They whispered into their devices recording the moment, yet even as they prepared to twist it into accusation, the truth could not be erased. The mother's gratitude and the boy's voice were now part of the story that spread through the city like hidden fire. When the mother returned to her shelter, she felt both fear and hope. Fear that the enforcers would strike harder. Now, hope that the act of giving the pendant had planted something greater than words. Meanwhile, the human held the small token in his hand all night, staring at it until dawn. It reminded him that what he had done was not forgotten, that his choice carried meaning beyond himself, and though the shadows grew darker, his resolve grew brighter. By the next day, whispers spread faster than ever, not only about the human's defiance but now about the life debt he had been given. Traders spoke of it behind their stalls, workers murmured of it in the factories. Even some guards repeated it in hushed tones. The idea that a human had been honored with such a sacred token unsettled many, for it blurred the lines of power and weakness. It suggested that kindness, once mocked, could earn respect stronger than fear. The enforcers gathered again in their tower, anger boiling in their voices. "This is dangerous," one spat. "First he fed a child, now he receives loyalty from citizens. Soon others will look to him as an example." The commander's voice was colder than stone. "Then we will not only silence him, we will make him a warning so brutal that no one will dare remember him with honor." Their decision was made. The storm they had held back would soon strike, but in their arrogance they could not see that the seed they feared had already grown, roots deep into the hearts of the people. And somewhere in the city, a mother whispered a prayer for the man who had risked everything for her child, while her son clutched his small toy and dreamed not of soldiers or rulers, but of a human cashier who had stood against cruelty with nothing but his heart. Humanity's flame. The city was restless, though its streets appeared the same, though its towers gleamed with the same cold lights, though its markets rang with the same shouts of vendors. Beneath the surface something had shifted. The whispers about the human cashier had grown into murmurs, the murmurs into quiet conversations, and now even those who mocked him found themselves repeating the story, not because they believed in kindness but because the memory refused to die. The enforcers had tried to silence him, but instead they had made him a name that lived on every tongue. The human himself felt the weight of this storm pressing down on him. Each day he walked through the streets with the pendant hidden in his pocket, its small weight reminding him of the mother and child who had stood before him with gratitude shining in their eyes. He knew the enforcers would not stop. He could see it in the way their patrols lingered near him, in the way strangers pointed and quickly turned away, in the way fear seemed to tighten around the air wherever he went. Yet he did not bend. His steps remained steady, his eyes unbroken. The day of reckoning arrived without warning. The marketplace once again became the stage. Enforcers marched into its center in greater numbers than before, their boots striking the stone ground with thunderous rhythm. The crowd parted quickly, fear spreading like fire. Vendors shut their stalls, families pulled children behind them. Yet all eyes remained fixed on the single stall where the human worked, for they knew he was the reason the enforcers had come. The commander stepped forward, taller and more imposing than the others, his armor black as night, his mask gleaming in the sun, his voice cold enough to silence the entire square. "This human has defied the order. He has spread weakness among you. He has dared to raise his head against the law of strength. Today, we end this defiance." The crowd trembled, yet none moved, because within them there lived two voices, one of fear urging them to stay silent, and another, quieter but stronger, whispering that they had already seen the truth with their own eyes. The guards seized the cashier, dragging him into the open, his arms restrained, his body still marked, with bruises from before, yet his head was held high, his voice steady. "You call kindness weakness, but I call it strength." The commander raised his hand, signaling for punishment, but the human continued, his voice carrying across the square. "You fear mercy because you cannot control it. You fear compassion because it spreads without chains. But no matter what you do to me, they all saw it. They all know it happened, and no one can erase it." The crowd stirred, murmurs rising again. The commander slammed his weapon against the ground, his voice booming, "Silence, or you will share his fate." But the murmurs did not stop. They grew louder, a ripple of voices spreading like water breaking through stone. An old vendor muttered, "He only fed a child." Another shouted louder, "That is no crime." Soon voices rose from every side, their fear melting into something stronger. "He showed mercy. He showed strength. Why do we call this wrong?" The enforcers turned in confusion, for the crowd was no longer silent. The crowd was no longer afraid. The commander raised his weapon to strike the human down, but before he could act, something extraordinary happened. The mother, who had once stood trembling at the counter, stepped into the square, her child in her arms, her voice clear, though her body shook. "You call him weak, but my child lives because of him. If this is weakness, then weakness is stronger than your law." She lifted the boy high, and his small voice carried over hers. "He is not weak. He is strong." The words of the child broke the last chains of silence. The crowd roared, voices crashing together. "Strong. Kindness is strength. We will not forget." The enforcers stepped back, their formation trembling as the tide of voices grew louder. They had weapons, but the people had fire in their hearts, and that fire was spreading faster than any order could contain. The commander tried to shout them down, his weapon raised, but the crowd surged forward, not in violence, but in unity, bodies pressing together, voices rising as one. They surrounded the human. Forming a barrier of living defiance, the enforcers hesitated, for to strike now would mean striking the very people they ruled, the very crowd that had always obeyed, and in their hesitation they revealed their weakness. The human stood at the center of it all, his body bruised, his hands bound, but his spirit shining brighter than ever. He looked at the commander and spoke calmly. "You can rule with fear, but fear ends when people remember they are not alone. You call me weak, but look around you. Kindness is stronger than your chains." The commander's mask hid his face, yet behind it his fury burned, for he knew the battle had already been lost, not with weapons, but with words, not with blood, but with courage. The enforcers withdrew slowly, their commander vowing in silence that this was not over. But the people knew the truth. They had seen power bend before mercy. They had seen fear give way to hope. They had seen a single human ignite a flame that no shadow could smother, and that flame would burn long after the guards had left. That night, the city did not whisper. It spoke openly. Stories carried in every home, in every stall, in every alley, of the human cashier who stood against cruelty with nothing but his heart, of the mother who dared to step forward, of the child whose voice shattered silence. And though the enforcers still watched from the shadows, they could not undo what had been born in the open, a belief that even in the coldest world, even in. The darkest rule, the smallest act of kindness could light a fire that reached the stars, and so the human walked home not as a prisoner but as a symbol, his steps heavy, his body weary, but his soul unbroken. In his pocket he carried the pendant, its glow faint yet steady, just like the flame that now burned across the city, a flame that would never be extinguished, for it was not his alone. It belonged to everyone who had seen, everyone who had heard, everyone who had felt the truth. Humanity's flame had been lit, and no shadow would ever silence it again.
Thank you for joining Eternal Human Spirit, where humanity always rises again.